Bench-Capon. He is an honorary visiting professor, Department of Computer Science, University of Liverpool, UK. And Trevor Bench-Capon has researched into artificial intelligence and law since the early 1980s, initially at Imperial College, London, but since 1987 at the University of Liverpool, and has written some 300 journal and conference papers. Although formally retiring in 2012, he has remained research active and continues to hold an honorary professorship at Liverpool. He has been program chair of both ICAL and Zurich and was president of the International Association for AI and Law from 2001 to 2003. He is an editor-in-chief of AI and Law Journal. He has also been active in the computational argumentation community and was organizing chair of the inaugural Comma conference in 2006. Today, he is going to give a talk on modeling reasoning with legal cases using argumentation schemes. So without taking further time, I would like to welcome Professor Bench-Capon, and it's our pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen.
Okay. Yes. So could you share your screen? Yes. Yeah. So just go to the slideshow and we can see the first. Yeah.
That version?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And let's talk about modeling reasoning with legal cases. This is a very important thing in AI law since the very beginning in the 70s. And the particular way I learned to do it is using argumentation schemes. So to give an overview, and let's talk about the stages of reasoning with a legal case. Reasoning with a legal case goes through a sequence of stages, and each stage has its own distinctive reasoning, so it's important to recognize this. I'll briefly touch on how these various stages have been approached in AI law, say a little bit about why I like argument schemes, and then I'll use argument schemes for the various stages. And I'll focus on the stage of factor restriction, since that's relatively new. So what happens when we reason with a legal case? The decision itself depends on the law, and the law sets out the conditions that must be satisfied. So in the well-known domain of state secrets law, the plaintiff wins if and only if the information was trade secret and it was misappropriated. Some of these terms can be further defined in a similar way. So an information was misappropriated if and only if it was used and there was a confidential relationship, or the information was acquired by improper means. But at some point, this law may come from statute or from precedent cases and provide a logical framework in which the reasoning can be conducted. And there's an example from IDP, from Sheffield House and Kevin Ashley. So we see a logical model there in which the node is necessary and sufficient conditions. And these nodes are termed issues in the AI law literature. Now the problem is, at some point, these laws run out. So whether the information is valuable cannot be given necessary and sufficient conditions. So how do we resolve these issues? We cannot give necessary and sufficient conditions. Rather, we think about reasons why they should be decided for and reasons why they should be decided against. And the issues are associated with a set of possible reasons. And these reasons are termed factors in the literature. So if we look at IDP, we can see that each issue is associated with a set of factors. Some of these factors to the plaintiff and some of the factors to the defendant. And the idea is to gather these reasons and to decide which reasons are stronger. So we need to weigh these factors. To resolve the issue, the factors to the plaintiff must be compared with the factors to the defendant. And the preference between them can be determined by precedent or by the values or purposes served by deciding one way rather than the other. John Halsey has modelled this formally and distinguishes two models. The so-called results model, in which all the winning factors are required to defeat the losing factors, and the reason model, in which a subset of the winning factors are sufficient to defeat the losing factors. And the reason model has the advantage of constraining more future cases, but the disadvantage of using knowledge to identify the correct subject to serve as the reason. So, where do these factors come from? The factors represent stereotypical patterns of fact that provide a reason to decide for one side or the other. But whether these factors apply may itself be a subject of dispute. For example, is cousin a close family relationship, or must it be brother or sister? How much effort shows that a product is not reverse engineerable? Everything is in principle reverse engineerable, but it needs to be a reasonable process. How long is a significant absence? How rigorous do security measures need to be a reason to fine to the plaintiff? Alternatively, how lax do they need to be a reason to fine to the defendant? And there are a variety of ways to ascribe these factors, and I'll go into this in some detail later. So factors are decided on the basis of facts, but where do the facts come from? But in many AI law systems, we're looking at higher level hooks in which the facts are not in dispute. But in first instance cases, the facts need to be established on the basis of evidence. And for evidence, we can find witnesses, we can look at physical evidence, we can take the testimony of expert witnesses. And none of this is really specific to law. We can use a variety of everyday arguments to move from evidence to what we believe. So, if we look at these stages, we can see that various higher and lower places have applied to different stages. So if we think about evidence, comes from the testimony of a witness, it then moves on to facts, typically decided by a jury of lay people. On the basis of this, the advocates for the two sides identify factors. The factors resolve the issues which are taken from the law, and finally, the judge decides the outcome. And all these things have been looked at in our own law. So, to move from evidence to fact, we have standard reasoning with evidence, such as Bayes' theorem and Story, and Forrest Beck and Jerome Heffin have worked on this. Factors determined by patterns of fact can be found in Wisdom's and Lasse's hypo system and also in this book. The move from factors to issues is probably where most work has been directed, and we need to find preferences based on precedents, values, and purposes. And we can point to Cato, Louise and Lasse, my own work with Giovanni Sartre, Henry Patton's work, written without Giovanni Sartre, and the work of John Hawkins. And finally, when we resolve the issues, we can use the law to identify the outcome, and that's particularly associated with logical programming approaches, such as Marek survey, but is also found in hybrid systems, such as Lucian Sarek Cabaret and IVP, etc. in heaven. So that's how we looked at AI and law. The approach I take in this book is to use argument themes. These links are used by Love Lawson, and they're widely used in AI approaches to structured arguments. An argument theme is a set of characteristic benefits, a conclusion, and importantly, a set of characteristic critical questions which can be used to challenge the conclusion. The premises is a prima facie reason to accept the conclusion, and then the critical question is raised to challenge the conclusion. The critical questions may themselves be associated with argument themes, and typically there are characteristic responses to the various critical questions. So why use argument themes? Well, I find them convenient to articulate how various claims can be supported. They can be used for argument generation. They can instantiate the themes and the critical questions from a knowledge base. They're useful for constructing dialogue processes. Essentially, they're dialectical. We put forward a theme, we challenge the theme with critical questions. And these provide a source of dialogue moves. They give reasons to support the claim, ways to challenge, and ways to reject. Now, for each of the four stages identified, we need different things. Each stage has its own characteristic set of schemes. Some of these are standard and found in the general literature, but others, particularly from factor factors and from factors to issues, are distinctive to legal reasoning. I did a fairly informal characterization of the scheme in this book, and I was in most detail on the move from factor factors because that's the least studied in the literature. But let's go through them in order. First, issues to outcomes. This is just standard logical reasoning. We have a warrant premise, which is the rule which says how issues determine the outcome. The issue section, which says that the issues are or are not satisfied, and then the outcome, which is the outcome is satisfied or not. So, for example, the warrant might be if the information was trade secret and misappropriated, fine to the plaintiff. We can say that it was trade secret, it was misappropriated, and so the fine to the plaintiff. Or, alternatively, if the information was not trade secret, we can use modus ponens to say the defendant is guilty. The critical questions are that the issues may in fact not be satisfied, and we can resolve this using the factors to issue scheme. Or that the warrant was not sufficient, some additional issues, which is fine, which we can resolve by reference to the relevant law. Or we can say the warrant was not necessary, that there's some additional way of showing the outcome, and again, we resolve this by reference to the relevant law. So there's nothing special about moving from issues to an outcome. The law is a logical model, and the things simply apply standard logical reasoning. However, moving from factors to issues is a bit different. Here, we use a factor preference scheme. So we say we have a pro-factor premise, which is the factors which support the resolution of the issue to the proponent's side. That's the pro-factors common to the current case and the present case. Similarly, we have a con-factor premise, which are those which support the resolution of the issue to the opponent's side. Factors in common then to both the current case and the new case, or the present case. We then have a preference premise, which says that the pro-factors are, the facts are not, preferred to the con-factors. And then the conclusion is that the issue should be resolved to the proponent or the opponent's side. The preference itself is established by a precedent or by relevant purposes or values served by the precedent. And we can find a set of schemes in this in a paper I wrote with Henry Buchan and others back in 2016, published in Logic and Computation. So what are the critical questions? Well, it might be that there's a counter example. We have a different precedent or a different value system. And this is used, this can be posed using the scheme we just put forward for arguing for the other side. And it's responded to by posing these particular questions to that instantiation of the factor question. The second particular question is whether the precedent can be distinguished. And this is posed using the distinction scheme. This has a factor present, a factor in one, but not both the current case, and this is unfavourable to the proponent. Strengthens the proponent in the precedent, or strengthens the opponent in the current case. We have a precedent statement which says that this additional factor changes the precedent, and the conclusion is that we cannot conclude that the proponent is doing. And we have a distinctive set of particular questions to this thing. So the particular questions to the distinction thing are, firstly, is there a different factor which cancels out the distinguishing factor? So we have an additional factor premise. There's another difference between the present and the current case relating to the same issue, but with the opposite polarity to the original distinction. And from this, we conclude the distinction is not significant. Alternatively, we can find a different factor to substitute for the missing factor. So there's another difference in the present case and the current case, the present and the current case, which relates to the same issue but has the same polarity. And because these two factors cancel one another out, we can say that the distinction is not significant. For moving from evidence to fact, we note that decisions at this stage are often taken by lay jurors, not by lawyers. And the reason that this is possible is that the reason itself is not specifically legal. And there are many argument schemes that we use every day to assess evidence in order to draw conclusions. And all these things can be used in the legal context. And this includes being told by an expert, being told by someone who saw it, by reasoning from cause to effect, by inferring to the best explanation, and by many other things. So again, this is perfectly normal reasoning. It's the way we move from evidence to what we believe in everyday life. And these things were looked at by Forrest Beck and all back in 2003 in a paper in our own literature. But now we come on to a relatively novel set of things which enable us to move from these facts to factors. And I know that in more detail here because this stage has not really been explored in our own world. And I will take as my starting point the notions that I mentioned introduced in Wisdom and Ashley's hypothesis. And their idea was the fact that they take the case on various dimensions. Dimensions are those aspects of a case which are relevant because they might provide reason. So the significance of a fact depends on where on the dimension they locate the particular case. And the significance is recorded by assigning a factor to show which side, if any, is favoured. And that factor corresponds to a range on the case. And we need dimension because the factor of the case is varied. In property law, we find a fox, a duck, a soul, a fish, and a baseball are all treated exactly the same for Pearson versus Post in foreign cases. So we use those flat ones to these dimensions. The dimension of aspects of a case which may be significant, and the dimensions provide a range of values and a case is located at a given point. The point may be itself a simple fact, or it may be deduced from other facts. Thus, age is a dimension, and my age is 68, puts me at a point on that dimension. Pursuing one's livelihood, however, depends on other facts. The fact that I'm not being paid for this means that I'm not pursuing my livelihood. Now, some range on dimension give us a reason to decide for one party to the dispute, and these ranges are the factors. So if we look at a dimension, we find that it increasingly favours a particular side. At one end, it's extreme pro-plaintiff, and at the other end, we have the extreme pro-defendant point. And at various points on that, the significance of the dimension changes. And these are what Adam Bizoni termed switching points. So to the left of the switching point, we have the pro-factor, pro-plaintiff factor assigned. Then as we move along dimension, we pass the switching point and that factor stops the time. Eventually we come to a second switching point, and then a pro-defendant factor starts the time. And the middle area is neutral, where no factor applies. Of course, there may be no neutral area. There may be a single switching point at which we move from pro-plaintiff to pro-defendant. Now, some factors are simply Boolean. For example, in Plato, which is Plato's dimension in case literature, factors may favour the plaintiff or be neutral. Rise employed is an example. Or they may favour the defendant or be neutral. Information known to intelligence. Or they might favour the plaintiff is true and the defendant is false. In fact, there's no example in Plato, and in Plato, only one of the 13 dimensions can favour both sides. Security measures, which in fact is a range, not a Boolean fact. And in Plato, 10 of the 13 dimensions are Boolean and 3 are ranges. If we look at these genuine ranges, we have that example, which favours the plaintiff until it becomes neutral. The second example, which starts off at neutral and then favours the defendant. And then security measures, which favour the plaintiff, then become neutral and then favour the defendant. However, there may be more than one factor to decide on a particular dimension. Thus, disclosures to outsiders, the injured neutral, then favours the defendant, and then if there have been enough disclosures, we get a stronger factor, more strongly favoring to the stronger. So, how do we apply factors? There's a variety of ways. Some of them, like bribes employed, we can simply use the ordinary meaning of the term. Some of them, like the shows to outsiders, we use the splitting point as a threshold on a range. Sometimes, as a competitive advantage, we have a trade-off between two dimensions to describe the factor. And then sometimes we have analogy, so that in Plato, wiretapping is an invasive technique by virtue of its analogy with burglary. So we'll now look at some argument themes for each of these four ways of describing factors. Firstly, the ordinary meaning theme. We have a fact premise. These facts are still in the head. A usage premise pointing to the ordinary meaning of a factor, which say that these facts are sufficient to establish that factor applies. And the conclusion is the factor applies. Critical questions are that the facts are not sufficient to establish a factor. We want another fact. That in fact there's an exception, there's some other fact which represents an exception to this general usage. Or there's a rebuttal which says that in case contains other facts which establish that an incompatible factor applies. So that's the ordinary boundary meaning. Then we get the threshold, the so-called splitting point thing. And this can be used both to argue that a factor applies and that it does not apply. We start off with a precedent premise, saying that there is a precedent at point X on the dimension to which factor applies. The case premise is that the current case is at point Y on that dimension. The party premise is that a factor favours a particular party. The value premise then says that Y is more or less favourable to that party than the original, and hence the factor applies or does not apply to the case. The precedent effectively puts a bound on the splitting point, which the case in question either does or does not apply. The critical questions are that the stronger factor objection, which says that Y is so much more favourable that a stronger factor applies, not the one being argued for. If the information is in the public domain, the closest to outsiders is rejected in favour of the more powerful disclosure in public domain. There's a rebuttal which finds another question, which is that the splitting point claim can be made with the opposite conclusion. Essentially, there is a conflict between these precedents. And if we argue that a factor does not apply, we can argue that the bound is not tight. So although Y is less closer than X, it is close enough that the factor still applies and that Y should be regarded as the new bound. We can look at these graphically. The precedent shows where the principal factor applies, and the use case is more favourable, and so we can argue that a factor applies. Others argue that the use case is less closure, and so the factor does not apply. And then the physical question, which says that a stronger factor applies, because we have a sticking point here. Or we can say that in fact the use case identifies a new bound of the sticking point. And so it was in fact applied. Trade-off examples, essentially we have two dimensions and we have a line which shows how they trade off. So in Cato, competitive advantage depends on the amount of time saved and the amount of money saved. The more time saved, the less money needs to be saved. But sometimes even the combination of two is not enough, and so no factor applies. But if the combination is sufficient, then the competitive advantage factor does apply. It's just not enough. Example used by Passion Sartre in John 40, the sister Renaissance, and that depends on the percentage of income earned abroad and the length of absence. P1, absence of sound, and we can say the factor applies in P1. In P2, the factor does not apply, and so we can rule off this area. But in P3, it may apply, it may not apply. And the idea is to set a line excluding the ones that don't apply, including the ones that do, and see whether the use case applies. Note that the line can be drawn more or less open. So the trade-off stream identifies a set of precedents in which the factor is present and which is absent. The rotation present, which uses the two factors axes, and these precedents can then be represented as a set of branch points of that graph. The haste premise rotates the current haste on the graph. The line premise fits the line to include all of the precedents that we want. The point premise, which says that this time also includes or does not include the use case, from which we conclude that a factor applies, respectively, does not apply to the use case. Trivial questions can be a negative counterexample, a precedent which satisfies the line, but which does not have the factor. A positive counterexample, a precedent with the factor which does not satisfy the line. And the example of factor does not apply, that the line should be relaxed, moved downwards in my example, so that we can include the case without creating any counterexample. Finally, we have the analogy stream. Several argumentation streams for reason by analogy, but often reason applies to whole cases. We, however, apply it to aspects in order to establish a particular fact. The stream has a base precedent describing a particular situation in the precedent, and saying that a factor is applied to the precedent on the basis of that situation. We then say that our new case describes a second situation, but as it relates to a factor, that situation is sufficiently similar to that one that by analogy we can plausibly describe the factor in the new case. Trivial questions, yes, the factors, differences between the present and the use case, which suggests if it was not applied. Sufficient similarity, we can argue that although there's a similarity, it is not sufficient to justify the description of the factor. Cousin is analogous to brother, but not close enough. And then rebuttal, it finds another person with another analogy in which the factor is not applied. So those are my 4 key themes. I can summarize. Modeling residual cases has been a central concern of Iran law from its very beginning. It involves a series of stages as we move from evidence through facts, through factors, to issues, and finally to verdict. Different Iran law approaches have addressed different stages. In most cases, it's been on the move from factors to verdict. And sometimes this is ignored issues, so whole sequences does not move straight from factors to outcomes. And precedence can be seen as a source of precedency between sets of factors, and that's how they're seen in Halsey and Platinum Alpha and Cato. And sometimes these relate to social values from nation to nation. However, precedents have functions other than simply establishing precedent. Some set the framework of issues. These are known as framework precedents. Others are needed in order to make structural restrictions. They can set thresholds, they can identify trade-offs, and they can concern analysis. Modeling using argumentation schemes, which I've done here, helps articulate the various reasoning processes used at the various stages, shows how to argue for a particular point in the argument, and the critical questions show how to attack the various arguments. And they can be used to identify arguments in a knowledge space. They can be used to ground the dialogue process, and they can be used to explain and justify outcomes. So altogether, to be useful. And that's all.
Thanks, Professor Bench-Capon, for the interesting talk. And the panelists, if you have any question, you can directly unmute and ask your questions here. Okay, so before going into the panelist, I have one question regarding your form to factor direction, right? So I have one question regarding how easy it is to determine the factors from the given facts, or does it depend on the complexity of the case? Or
the people who done it by hand, I've modeled dozens of domains in which I manually listed the cases to determine the factors on the basis of that. So someone experienced in the domain can use this they apply. And what I've done in this talk is articulate the kind of reasoning that I use. Now, if we have precedents, we can use those. So I would say it's a task that requires familiarity with the domain and familiarity of precedent, but and may involve dispute, because in some cases the whole head turns on whether a factor applies or not. This is exactly why we need to uncover the kind of reason involved. And that helps.
Okay, and in the entire stage, right, there is this fact to factor and then factor to issue to verdict. Where can we apply this reasoning process, or is it basically applied in each of these conversion phases?
Well, we have various systems in multiple places. If we have the case fact, then we can apply it to identify the arguments that can be advanced to resolve the case.
And is there any way to identify whether any bias or something is there in the factor determination, whether it basically biased to the plaintiff or the defendant?
Well, the function of the visual question is to uncover the bias. I mean, obviously, a lawyer puts forward arguments that will be biased in favour of his own side. But that bias is then meant to be countered by the critique given by the opponent to those arguments, and the judge is meant to resolve it in an impartial fashion.
Okay.
Inevitably, there will be bias, but the transparent critiquing process is meant to identify and hopefully prevent it.
Okay, thank you. So let me see if there are any questions. Okay, so we are quite okay. So there is one question from. Let me read it out for you. So one question from the Jack G. Conrad, that can you describe progress that has been made in the area of automation of some of the modeling that you have described in your talk?
A lot of the work on automation and modeling attempts to move plates and facts to outcomes. So, for example, the famous work of Elite and the work done by Major Leader on the ECHR all takes the fact and tries to predict the decision. Now, I would argue that this is inherently limited because you're jumping over two stages. The leap between fact and outcome is too great. Carl Branson, however, has suggested that what we do is learn the factors in the case rather than the outcome, and then we can use these factors to feed into the logical model inside the case. And he has quite success in ascribing factors to his particular domain, which is something to do with World Wide Web. But that was quite a constrained domain. I'm currently looking at a project which is trying to ascribe factors in the ECHR, and that's a much more challenging domain. And I think work is still in progress there. I don't think that anyone is trying to move from evidence to fact, but I think the factor move is exactly where machine learning approaches should be looking. That helps that?
Okay, so
Thanks,
I guess
Trevor.
Okay, so you can directly ask people. So, so let me wait for a couple of minutes if there are any further questions from the audiences.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, hello, Professor Bench-Capon. This is Shaptarshi.
Hi.
Hello. Sorry, my video is not working for some reason. Okay. So thank you for the very excellent talk. So one slightly high-level question I have is that so you must be seeing these neural models being applied to legal text increasingly, like the deep learning models.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, what do you think as, or how do you see this paradigm? As in, what are the main challenges or targets? What should be the targets for this kind of models? Because there are some problems with, say, explainability and other things. So, what do you think are the? Yeah.
Well, firstly, I think that by trying to move states and factors to an outcome, a fact to an outcome, they're setting themselves an impossible task because the reason must pass through these states. They're throwing out a huge amount of the main knowledge. And that explains why their performance is actually not very good. In contrast, if we were to apply it to a set of issues, it would be no problem at all. There's a perfectly good model there. So once you apply the issues, you should certainly learn the logical model. Applying to factors is an intermediate state. Again, I think the work that Bart Verheij has recently done, is for saying and residing in the 90s, it shows that even a good success rate doesn't actually apply the correct rationale. And in law, it's important that we apply the law, not some approximation to it. So I think there are conceptual problems with the approach. I'm unsurprised that the success is rarely better than 70%. And even if the success rate is high, I still am skeptical that the correct rationale is applied. And then, of course, there are the problems with explainability.
So Trevor, an obvious follow-up on that is that you referenced Carl Branting and his approach, that he argues that one should learn the factors first rather than jumping from the facts to, and outcomes. So what would you think, in response to Saptarshi's question, what would you think about applying deep learning models to doing just that, to learning the factors?
Well, that's what
and
I
then
would like to see, yeah, I think that's the way it is. I think the current approaches is attempt to move from factors to outcomes are mistaken. Instead, you've got to move from fact to factors. But then we don't have the same data available, because whilst we have a database tells us the outcome of the case, we don't have the database that tells us the factors that we applied on the case. So using machine learning, basically get the data, the training set, that shows which factors to apply from. Well, how does that by some manual analysis? And argues that for his domain, analyzing a relatively small training set is okay. But whether that will scale up to a complicated domain, I'm not sure. But certainly, having the whole a factor restriction rather than outcome prediction is what I think machine learning approaches should be looking at.
Do you know of anyone who has done any preliminary experiments? We're talking about, I guess, a multi-stage system, breaking up, you know, the scheme.
There's Howell's experiment. Henry Classen did something along those lines, but he started from a feature vector rather than from natural language. So that was pretty easy. And as I say, I'm hopefully attempting to look at this problem with Casey Atkinson and Jack Munford and the other paper somewhere. Especially the last year of setting out our goals.
Let's see. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Professor.
Okay. I guess there are no further questions in the chat box. Okay. In that case,
yeah, we can move to the private session.
yeah, we can move to the private session. And thanks, Professor, for this interesting talk. And I already pasted the link into the chat box, so you can directly join through the link. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor.